USCHO.com.
Welcome to USCHO Spotlight for Wednesday, December 14th, 2022. Each week we talk to a coach, player, administrator, or journalist about college hockey. This podcast is sponsored by DCU, Digital Federal Credit Union. What will DCU mean to you? Find out today by visiting dcu.org. Membership required. I'm Ed Trefzger alongside Jim Connelly. Well, just because there's a break in college hockey doesn't mean that there's not great hockey to watch. It'll be Boxing Day in Maritime Canada as they host one of the greatest tournaments around the world, and that's the 2023 IIHF World Juniors.
And joining us now to talk about the World Junior Championship, it is our go-to guy for international hockey. He has been covering the U.S. beat for, 2 decades now, it seems. But he is the senior content creator for FloHockey. Chris Peters, welcome into the show. I know it's really Christmas, but it's really Christmas for you because this is the time of year that you love. This is your holiday season.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, it's kind of every time, you kind of get that emotional high of the holidays with the family and everything. And then you get the World Juniors right after it. So it's just kind of nonstop. And it's always fun to be talking about this stuff this time of year and just, the attention's back on it. It feels a little bit more normal. And that's a great thing. It's a great thing that we're going to be able to have, a mostly normal World Junior, still no Russia in this tournament, but mostly it's back to normal. So that's a great thing.
Mostly normal in terms of the dates that it's played, and hopefully there won't be any sort of COVID outbreak, but it feels strange to me because the last one was just finished about 5-6 months ago after it had to get postponed from the winter to the late summer. Does that kind of have some sort of an impact in how it feels, maybe even to how quick you have to organize this next team after the loss? You don't have the same type of summer development camps that you were able to have. Like, not everything flows in the same way it typically does for World Juniors.
Yeah, the cycle's been a lot different. And I think that summer camp in particular was where the big differences were felt because they had to pick two teams. They had to pick the summer team and this team. And obviously there were guys that were candidates for both teams. So that summer is usually trying to, get a feel for how guys are with each other, how they fit and different things like that. So they didn't really have that opportunity. That's why they actually invited a pretty heavy winter camp, this pre-tournament camp that's been going on since Monday at USA Hockey Arena. They've traveled kind of heavy, in terms of the number of players they brought with them and who's all there. So it was just, that's been the weird part. It's also tough too, because the coaching staff is, none of the guys that are on the coaching staff have coached in this tournament before. So that's another factor of kind of the preparation and different things that they've had to do. But I mean, in general, the process is still the same. You still get the same amount of time to watch these guys prior to the tournament with their college teams or junior teams, wherever they may be. And I think that I think that in general, now that they're at this stage, they have a really good idea of who they want to have on their team. They're just making those last kind of little spots figured out. And then, largely they'll have their same group. I guess one thing that's also different is in the COVID years, they had 25 players that they were allowed to bring to the tournament. That'd be 23 skaters and 3 goalies, or 22 skaters and 3 goalies. This year, it's back to the normal 23. However, I do believe that if you have injuries, you will be allowed to move players into your team as alternates, which has not been the case in years past. Which has been that's definitely been a factor in a lot of tournaments for various teams where all of a sudden they're down to 5 defensemen. So it's good to see that there's going to be some roster flexibility. But I think in general, everything else is pretty much normal.
I was going to hold the coaches till the end, but you brought them up, so I'm going to jump on that. Everybody's a first-time coach here. Rand Pecknold, the longtime Quinnipiac head coach. He'll lead this team. Pat Ferschweiler from Western Michigan, He'll be an assistant. Reed Cashman, Rand's longtime assistant at Quinnipiac, now at Dartmouth. He'll be another assistant. And the goaltending coach, another former Quinnipiac assistant, now a scout with the Tampa Bay Lightning, Jarrett Wayman. He's going to be the goaltending coach. Not a lot of experience here, but that doesn't always seem necessary in this tournament. This is more about knowing how to coach in very big games.
Yeah, big games and being able to make adjustments quickly. I mean, I think that it is different. I would say that it is different. I mean, we've seen some coaches come into the tournament and not have, the correct preparation, things like that. I don't think that's going to be a problem with Rand Pecknold. I don't think that this group they're going to be meticulous in their preparation. So that's going to be, step number one. And I think that's a big benefit to them. But it is in a short tournament, you have to make decisions very quickly. You have to make adjustments quickly, or the game and then the tournament can get away from you. We've seen it many times with different teams that have gone to the World Juniors, and they just for one reason or another didn't ever get it rolling, never found a way to get it rolling, and then they're out of the tournament. So there are going to be some really key factors here. I think Pat Ferschweiler is going to be running the power play. Rand and Reed Cashman are going to be running the PK. They're the chief strategists on that side of things, and they've always had such tremendous success in the defensive elements of the game at Quinnipiac. And but I think you're also going to see a very very attacking team. They want to play fast. I think that we saw that in the roster decisions. There were some players that did not make the team that didn't have necessarily the skating ability as some of the guys that are on the roster. So I think it's going to be really fascinating to see what the final product looks like and then how they utilize those players. But a lot of times keeping it simple is the best way. And, we'll see what they end up deciding to do in this tournament. The U.S. isn't in a terribly strong bracket. The other side of the bracket is actually pretty tough because Sweden and Czechia is on that side with Canada. But the Finns and the Slovaks in USA's bracket won't be easy either. So it's going to be an interesting kind of dynamic. But yeah, again, it all comes down to being able to make the adjustments quickly and before it's too late.
Let's jump into the preliminary roster, if you will. Goaltending is kind of where I look at it and say, who is the right guy? You have Caden Mberico, who had been in this tournament before, but other than that, you've got some guys that don't have a ton of experience at the international level. I know that Tyler Musick comes from the program, as does Trey Augustine. But where do you see this goaltending battle going? Do you feel like there's a clear number one, or is this something that there's going to be a massive battle right up until the first game of the tournament?
Yeah, I think that going in, having the experience Caden Mberico does from last year it gives them the leg up. But I also think they're going to give Trey Augustine a very long look at that potential to be the number one guy. He is an underager in the tournament. He was an underager at the under-18 Worlds last season. And he is, this season he's had a save percentage above .930 at the National Team Development Program, which is really difficult to do because they play colleges, they play, USHL international games. So, you're playing really tough competition. It's hard for goalies to have big numbers. And he's done that so far this year. He is a little bit bigger as well. Mberico is 5'11". We don't see too many 5'11" goalies, ascending the pro ranks these days. And it's not about being a professional. It's about, what you can do right now. And Mberico's had a good season with CC. He's played really well. The thing about him is, because of that size factor, he's got to rely a lot more on feel, quickness, different things like that, which can lead to, being out of position, giving up, some ugly looking goals. And that happened to him last year in the quarterfinals. So predictability is what you would love to have. And I don't know that the U.S. is necessarily going to have that. But then I think, I'm guessing they're going to bring three goalies. And then Musick and Andrew Oak, are the two other guys that are in there. I think they're, the decisive, that's the battle for me, is that who's going to be the number three for this team. And, both of them have kind of played secondary roles on their, Musick has played a little bit more, of the split than Oak has, in Saginaw. So I think it's going to be, down to Mberico and Augustine. I think, in the end, it'll probably be Augustine with that, or Mberico, sorry, with the experience. But again, I would not count out Augustine at this point.
on the back end, every single candidate for this team, current college player. I look at some of these guys, Ryan Ufko, Lane Hudson, Luke Hughes, Sean Behrens. There's a lot of offensive talent on the blue line. This seems, you can tell by this roster that there is going to have to be two-way defensemen that can jump into the offense at any minute.
Yeah, I think that they want guys that are going to push the pace, and I think the group that they have really does that. I think they picked the best group that they could based on what the player pool dictated. They could have brought in guys for size and for better defensive capabilities, but I think they just decided, we're just going to take the best defenseman that we can. But there's a lot of similarities. I mean, that's the thing that you always worry about is that, does this blue line have enough balance? They're not very big. A lot of the guys are sub 6 foot defensemen. I think, Luke Hughes, Ryan Chesley and Shai Buium are the only guys that are above 6 foot, and Chesley's 6 foot even. So, it's really, it's not a huge blue line, which Canada went big. Their roster, if US ever ends up beating Canada, they're going to have a significant advantage in the size department, will Canada. So, but I think that what you saw, you're right, you're spot on. These guys are going to be jumping into the play. They're going to be very important offensively. They went with skill. They went with fast puck movers, guys who can get pucks out of their zone quickly. And they're going to have to do that and basically play a very strong puck possession style game in order to make it so that size factor doesn't really come into play too much. You got to play fast.
A very deep roster at the forward position. And I know that cuts have to be made, but you look at some of these guys that have been lighting the lamp already. Snuggerud from Minnesota, Gauthier from Boston College, Logan Cooley from Minnesota, Kenny Connors from UMass. I mean, there's a lot of talented guys, and I leave guys like Jackson Blake off of that because I mean, there's just so many. You have a lot of guys that can put the puck in the net, but I always say in these tournaments, one of the biggest challenges is trying to make guys that have played the first line all their life fourth liners. Yeah. How much of a challenge will that be for Rand Pecknold and his staff?
It'll be a big challenge. I mean, I think that that's where the adjustments come into play. And you say, you also have to try to manufacture chemistry right away with a lot of these guys. I think that they did bring in some guys that have clear, fourth line, grinded out kind of energetic play that will translate better down the lineup. But yeah, I think you want to have 3 scoring lines for sure. And then that fourth line, you'd love to get some scoring pop out of them as well. As long as they kind of play to your identity, which is going to be an attacking, speedy game with a hard forecheck, then you're feeling pretty good about where you're at. So I think that this is going to be a very difficult, kind of roster to structure, just in terms of who are going to be the centers, who are going to be the wings. You definitely have some guys that are natural centers that you'll have to put on the wing. Do you try to get guys that have already had chemistry together, like Cutter Gauthier with Logan Cooley and Jimmy Snuggerud? I think that it's a virtual lock that Cooley and Snuggerud will play together as they have at Minnesota. Don't reinvent the wheel. So we'll have to see. But I think this group definitely can score. They definitely can play with some pace. And I think that there are going to be some guys that really jump up and step up. There always has to be. There's got to be that guy. There's got to be that Troy Terry somewhere in there that steps up at the right time. That's what you need. And because they don't have like the superstars like a Trevor Zegras, but they have a lot of, they could. I mean, that could be Cooley, that could be Snuggerud, could be Gauthier, could be Will Smith, who's an underager on the team and Boston College commit. So there's a lot of really good options for them, and they've got a lot of good problems to have, and that there are going to be some tough decisions to be made.
More with Chris Peters in a moment. This podcast is sponsored by DCU Digital Federal Credit Union. Visit dcu.org.
Know how people say life happens? Well, for me, life was happening, and I needed a new truck. I didn't have time to shop around for a good loan, so I got one from the dealer, higher interest and all. Month after month, those payments were squeezing me. So I went to DCU. They refinanced my loan and helped lower my rate, which lowered my payments. These days, I have more money in my pocket for whatever life throws at me. What will DCU mean to you? Insured by NCUA. Membership required. Visit dcu.org.
We continue our conversation with Chris Peters. I think you've kind of led to where I wanted to go next, Chris, is the style we're going to see out of USA. Is this going to look like what Rand has done at Quinnipiac over the past few years?
I think the template it's interesting because, Nate Lehman's was the head coach for the last couple of years. He got him to a win in the bubble in 2020. And that was just a remarkable showcase of the exact style that I think Rand Pecknold wants his team to play like, which is a hard forecheck, very quick. They were on Canada's defensemen. That was one of the best played gold medal games, maybe one of the best played USA games against a Canadian team that I had ever seen, because they had a game plan. They executed it perfectly. And I think that set the blueprint. I really do. I think that was the blueprint. They said, hey, this is the way that we need to play, regardless of who's on the other side. This is how we can have success. I think that's maybe, it just so happens that the similarities between that style and Quinnipiac style are very, 1-to-1 almost there. So it's not a stretch. It's certainly not a stretch. And I think that was part of why, Rand Pecknold was brought in, because it kind of is that consistency. You look at Providence, they play a certain way. You look at Quinnipiac, they play a certain way. So that's where we're seeing some really good strides there for those guys.
You mentioned in passing the bubble. Are things going to be pretty close to normal, or are there still going to be some COVID type precautions going on?
For everything that I've seen, I think that there will be some added measures, but not extreme measures in place. I think that they're going to continue to follow local guidelines, whatever they may be. And really in the merits of the Canadian Maritimes that have been pretty strict COVID protocols throughout. But I think that everybody's in a place where they're comfortable enough to say, hey, if a team does end up with some guys that, are out of the lineup, they'll be able to bring other players in, so I don't think we're going to see a situation here where, the tournament gets canceled or anything like that. I know that was obviously last year that happened. It was a nightmare. But, you also have to there have been other World Juniors where the flu ran through a bunch of teams and it really impacted the tournament too. And I'm not trying to minimize what COVID did, but that's just the nature of this season. People get sick and that's going to happen. And I think that they're trying to, basically move forward as best they can, as long as safety, doesn't get compromised. I think they'll just continue on.
We're far enough down the road. It seems like we're seeing the fruits of the USA Hockey American Development Model really help the team. When you talk to folks and from what you've observed, is that the case? Is that really making an impact now?
I think so, yeah, because, you look at the level of skill that the U.S. player has now, and that was always a hallmark of the ADM, was to create, to help develop more creative players, to have some unstructured play, to have small area games, to have, the age appropriate ice surfaces and things like that really were championed by the ADM. And I do think that we're seeing a more skilled player. There are a lot of other factors. You can't just simply point to that and say, because I think that the proliferation of digital video, the specialized coaching that these guys can get now, there's also, just the fact that I think coaching has gotten better across the board because there's been more emphasis on that education element, which again is another thing that USA Hockey has a big hand in. So, I think that the ADM, these are all these kids that are playing young men that are playing on Team USA are products of that system for the most part. They are products of that system. And I think the fruits of the labor and the sometimes unpopular decisions that were made have definitely had a positive impact on the game as a whole. I think we're you just look at the NHL right now and you see so many of these guys that were not part of that, but have now set a standard for the next level. So it's pretty fascinating to watch. And I think it's really great to see where the American game is right now.
Chris, you mentioned it off the hop, the bracket, the pool that the U.S. is in. Latvia, Slovakia, Switzerland, and Finland are the other four teams. That is actually the order the games will be played: the 26th, 28th, 29th, 31st. So they have 2 off days in there. between games 1 and 2, and then between 3 and 4 in pool play. Do you like the way this schedule sets up for them in terms of, I won't say it's increasing difficulty, but I don't know Slovakia well enough. I know the Swiss have always given the USA some headaches. Finland's a fantastic team. Does this schedule kind of build up into a more difficult day-by-day grind?
Yeah, I think so. And I think the coaching staff will like that too, is that, you want to get better every day. And these tournaments, it's the cliche that gets tossed around a lot, but it is the apt one. So I do think that sets up very well for them. I think this is a team that is going to need to have that time to build up. They're going to have that build towards, being a contending team once you do have to play at Canada. It doesn't hurt to go through some adversity over the course of the early stages of the tournament as well, just to know that, you can handle it. We've seen a lot of teams that just didn't handle adversity well when it met them at the wrong time. Because I think that was actually for USA last year. They rolled through the preliminary round, and then they had they laid an egg in the quarterfinal, and that can happen with some teams. So, I think that's got to be a huge focus for them, and it's a huge lesson learned. And you can't take anything for granted in this tournament. Not a single opponent either.
I look at also the game times for the U.S. all for the same time, same slot, 5:00 p.m. local time every night. That has to help as well. You're not going noon one day and then 5:00 the next day, or set 9:00 at night one day and then 11:30 in the morning. They've really benefited from the time slot that they're in.
Yeah, that helps. I mean, just consistency, but it's, again, then you have to make sure that if you get an unfavorable time slot for the quarterfinal or the semifinal, that you have to be able to adjust. So yeah, it does help for that preliminary stage. It certainly helps for staying healthy, staying rested, all those different things. That helps a ton. But yeah, I think that's certainly something that they'll be happy to have, and then hopefully if they need to adjust, they'll adjust.
And you look at this tournament spread between two cities, 2.5, 3 hours apart.
Yeah.
Halifax and Moncton. Halifax feels like the center stage. It feels kind of like the side stage, and that's where the U.S. will be playing their preliminary games. That probably can't hurt either. The fact that the brightest lights probably aren't shining on the U.S., that they don't have to feel the pressure from day one.
Maybe, yeah. I think I think that the fans that are there are going to be rooting against them every single game.
Of course,
so that's and I think Moncton. I think ticket sales have been pretty strong for this event because it's back in a junior city, which Hockey Canada hadn't done for a long time, and I think that's something that they're very excited about. And yeah, so I think that there's a lot of excitement about just getting there. It's a great building in Moncton. It's where the Moncton Wildcats play in the QMJHL. It is a fantastic facility. And then, yeah, I mean, you just kind of go through the motions of every game as the team that everybody wants to see lose. And you try to use that as fuel. And I think we'll see USA do that. But yeah, I think Halifax is definitely center stage. With Canada having won last year, they're playing the host city. They're doing a lot of their training camp in Moncton to just give those fans a little something to see. But they'll be in Halifax the whole time.
One last question: if it's not the U.S., if it's not Canada, what's the other team to watch out for in this tournament?
There's a real dark horse, and it's Czechia. And, I think that Sweden has lost some of their key guys. They won't have Simon Edmondson on defense. Finland is okay. But Czechia's got, David Juracek. They've got some really good players in general, guys that had some success at other levels. Yuri Kulich, who's been playing in the AHL this year, is on that team as well. So I think they're the dark horse to maybe be one of the last four teams standing. Will they win the tournament? I don't think so. But I think that's a team that, at least has a chance to make some noise.
See, all Czechia had to do was get people to say their name right.
Yeah.
And now they're suddenly everybody's, dark horse on the biggest stage. Everybody's talking about Czechia now.
Exactly. So it's wild. It's crazy to watch. And, this whole, like that team and just, Slovakia will be interesting. They're going to have a good team. Like they're just, it's a lot of fun to see these teams come in, and you never know what's going to happen in any of these World Junior Championships.
Well, it is the hiatus for college hockey, but it's also the best time for World Junior Hockey. We love watching this tournament from afar. You'll be on site, spreading your time between Halifax and Moncton. I wish you safe travels, and man, have a great tournament. This is such a fun event. Your expertise makes this podcast so much better.
Oh, well, thanks, guys. It's always a pleasure to be on. And yeah, I hope everybody enjoys the tournament. It's going to be a great one.
That's Chris Peters, senior content creator from FloHockey. Thanks for your time. This should be a great tournament. It should be a fantastic event.
Jim, we've talked to Chris over the years. He's become a great friend, and he's probably more knowledgeable about college hockey and international hockey than just about anybody you want to run across.
So well versed in this space, and he's been doing it for a long time, and I get it. But he can do everything. He knows the NHL game and the prospect game, especially. Loves college hockey. Loves the world stage for Team USA and all those championships, whether it be Olympics, World Championships, World Juniors, Women's Worlds, all those things. He knows the teams. He knows the players. I don't know anybody that's more well studied on this.
We were talking a little bit about coaches during our conversation. And Rand Pecknold has brought in a staff that is very familiar to him and has different personalities there. Pat Ferschweiler, just a fiery guy and an energetic guy to talk to. What's the impact of the staff on this, and how are they going to be able to mold the game in the way they need to make it successful?
Well, I think the number one thing a staff does is creates the style of play. And when you have this much high-end talent, it's a luxury as a coach, a head coach, for a coach like Rand Pecknold, who knows how to play a run and gun style, up-tempo style, heavy forecheck. They get in on you. They're quickly. They get to the net very quickly. They will win this game within 15 feet of the net, 20 feet of the net. They are fantastic. Any team I've watched of Rand Pecknold's can do that in spades. You add to that the fact that you've got a guy like Pat Ferschweiler running the power play. He has tons of energy, as you mentioned. Reed Cashman's so familiar to Rand Pecknold. I just like this staff in terms of the chemistry that they bring together and the experience that there's so many people here. You go down to like even hockey ops and stuff like that, looking through the entire roster. There's a lot of people here that are very familiar to Rand Pecknold. That's going to make this more comfortable for him in his first experience as a head coach. And I think that's the most important thing. But then I think as a head coach, and Chris kind of touched on this, the biggest thing in this tournament is how quick everything happens. And if you take, say, a loss in game 1 or 2, how do you rebound from that? It's very difficult for the U.S. not to make the medal round because only one team on each side is eliminated. But how do you handle early adversity? And we saw Nate Lehman do that a couple of years ago. They went on to win the gold. Last year, they had no adversity. They get into a quarterfinal and they lose. Like, how do you have to get better every day as a team, and you have to be able to make huge adjustments at times. Some are just slight, but you sometimes have to make those quick adjustments. Personnel, keeping rested players rested, and then get them in at the right time. It's all about using what you have in front of you because you have plenty of talent. It's just how do you make all of that work at the right moment each and every game? And this goes by quick. This whole tournament's over in less than 2 weeks. That's what you have to remember. You blink and it's over. So you can't make mistakes. Mistakes get magnified anytime you make them as a coach.
And you have to be able to work with a lot of talent who may have to slide back to being more of a role player. I think of last year's tournament, one guy who stood out that way as somebody who could be a physical forechecker was Brett Berard, and how he excelled at that. They're going to have to find people to fit into those positions and see who gels with whom on the forward lines too.
Yeah. And Chris Peters knows this lineup more than I do. And he knows these personalities more than I and you. So I trust his opinion that they do have some role players in there. And I think that's one of the most difficult things. And John Van Beesbroek has to be given some credit as the GM, because you're talking about having a coaching staff, but you still have a guy like John Van Beesbroek who's really in charge of selecting this team with some good input from a guy like Rand Pecknold who understands players. So now you're trying to build a team that has some superstars on it, some good guys that can be third line, and then some good guys that can be your fourth line that give you some energy when you need it, but they're not going to get the same minutes as that top line. It is hard because every one of these players that make this team have at some point in their career been considered the superstar. They have been the first line player almost all of their life. Maybe they, now that they've gotten to college, they've taken a second line role, but you're not going to see a lot of fourth liners, typical day-to-day NCAA fourth liners on this team or OHL fourth liners. You're going to see guys that are mostly first and second liners, maybe a few third line players. You've got to have that balance though, because what do you put out when you just need a little jump? But you with all the TV timeouts, with all the breaks, you don't get to your fourth line that often. So when are you going to put those players out? I know it's ideal for coaches to say, we just want to roll them over the board. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2. You don't do that because you end up getting into mismatches. You're still going to put out your first and second line as much as you need it. So you have to have players that can accept the role that they're being told that they have to play.
Well, we definitely look forward to seeing these games. They'll be on the NHL Network in the U.S., and that's available via Fubo TV if you stream. TSN has it in Canada and also on TSN streaming. So games at 4 p.m. Eastern times that most of the country will be able to watch them. You can stream them at work. Don't let the boss see it, but you're going to want to watch those games. I'm looking forward to it, and I've got high hopes every year for the U.S.
I love the time slot too. 4 o'clock's perfect. You don't have to, be worrying about setting aside your primetime television viewing every night. 4 p.m. It's good timing too, because we've now, if you're kind of just an all-around sports fan, we've been accustomed to a lot of day sports with the World Cup soccer tournament that's been going on for the last few weeks. Now we'll have a little respite. We'll jump right into World Juniors, a lot of daytime hockey. And don't forget, these games will start, I think in the US probably around 9 or 10 in the morning. You're going to have hockey on for 5, 6, 7 days straight, wall to wall from morning to night. Great time of year to be watching some really good international hockey.
Well, with that, we'll wrap up this edition of USCHO Spotlight. We're sponsored by DCU Digital Federal Credit Union. Visit dcu.org. Find our podcast at uscho.com/podcast or subscribe on your favorite podcast app. For Jim Connelly, I'm Ed Trefzger, and this has been USCHO Spotlight.